everyone.
Hello.
And come to Beside the Rookery, we have special guests Matt Forbeck and Marty Forbeck here to discuss their rather exciting Kickstarter for Shotguns and Sorcery. Before we begin, I would just like to offer a quick disclaimer. This is the first time ever that I have been in charge of running the stream. Normally, my lovely wife, Lindsay, would be here clicking buttons and pointing towards things and making sure everything happens correctly. That's not happening today. So you are very much in my hands as we attempt to delve into everything that is awesome and cool about Shotguns and Sorcery over the course of the next hour. So he looks around his screen and says, I can point at things and do stuff like this. Welcome to Beside the Rookery. More importantly, we've got a host of questions that have been pre-submitted by our patrons. If you want to become one of those, you can do so right there. Our patrons popped onto Discord and asked all their questions there. I'll pop some links into the chat in a moment so you can go do that yourself. But let's start with the most obvious place before we go into the actual questions so that we can ground ourselves into what's what. So we will open with, what is Shotguns and Sorcery? And I think the most obvious place to begin with that would be, hey, Matt, what do you think?
Oh, I think it involves shotguns and sorcery, right?
Both of them.
There you go. At the same time, often.
Or at least those two things.
Yeah,
oh, well, done.
At least. There's many ingredients in this crazy melange, but yes, definitely shotguns and sorcery are the primary flavors you're going to get out of it. Shotguns and Sorcery is a fantasy noir setting, as we like to call it, that is for whatever else, but it started out in... originally started out as a 3rd edition setting that I came up with way back around the year 2000. Eventually became fiction. I've now written 3 novels, 2 short stories, and a novella for it, which you can get in the Shotguns and Sorcery Omnibus, amongst other places. And then became a role-playing game in 2015. And now we're doing a Kickstarter for a 5th edition source book for it right now. Shotguns and Sorcery is a world in which the ruler of the dead, who is this crazy powerful necromancer, has unleashed a zombie apocalypse upon the continent and destroyed everybody, with some small exceptions. Those exceptions include everybody who ran ahead of the zombie horde and managed to get to a dragon in a mountain and said, like the Lonely Mountain in The Hobbit, for instance, right? And said to the dragon, save us, help! We're all going to die. You're going to die too. We're all going to die. And the dragon said, I'll tell you what, if you let me, I will go and blast away the zombies for you while you build a wall around the mountain. And then you can live inside the wall and you'll be in my mountain. And because you're in my mountain, I will be in charge and I will be the dragon emperor and you will live in Dragon City. Right. So they formed what they call the Dragon City Compact, or pact that actually is a contract between them and the dragon. And they managed to pull it off. So now you have a city that's 500 years later, where that's been accreting for a long time. So it looks kind of like Minas Tirith crossed with 1920s Los Angeles, right? Which you have these cramped together areas. Yeah, it's kind of wild. Cramped together areas where magic takes the place of a lot of technology. So instead of like gas lamps, you have glow globes that come on at night. Instead of hailing a taxi, you put up your hand and a flying carpet comes down and grabs you and takes you to where you want to go. The city has stratified by fantasy race and by class. So at the top you have the dragon, at the top of the mountain, then you get the elves, which of course the longest living. Some of them still remember meeting the dragon back in the day. Then we have the dwarves who built the wall and everything else, the gnomes, the hobbits. Then we have the village down below, and then below where mostly it's humans and such. And below that, right along the edge of this great circle, the wall that they built, is Goblin Town, where all the goblins and orcs and kobolds and ogres and such, the quote unquote evil races have been shunted into the slums down there and have to live these hard lives because the other people above them they're protecting everybody, but they're protecting themselves better than others. Let's put it that way. So in the setting, you have a lot of different options of things you can do. You can wander out into the wilderness and raid all the places where people abandoned them because the zombies were coming, and there's plenty of stuff out there. Or you can have all sorts of adventures inside the city too, because this is urban fantasy, and not in the modern sense, but it's urban in the sense that we created here in fantasy in the Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings kind of sense. So that high fantasy mixed with Raven Chandler, essentially. So there's all sorts of different noirish adventures you can have through there and do all sorts of wacky and wonderful and dark and horrible things, however you want to run them. So that's it in a nutshell. I tend to ramble on for long periods of time. So if I do, you just start going like this. Marty will usually tell me because he's my son. He has no fear.
Rambling's good. We like rambling. We're all noted ramblers here.
Everyone loves
Try to
to
get involved in this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
Do you have anything you'd add to that, Marty, in terms from your angle and how you look at it?
Well, should I show the city map?
yeah,
The
have
full
it.
color
yeah,
city
She's
map.
actually prepared and knows
You tried to
this
show it on one of the other shows we did the other day, but she couldn't find it.
That's right, because I'm silly and can't read. So
Oh yes, looking marvelous.
There we go.
Also, if you've got any handy graphics at your side that you want to share, if you want to share your screen, I can also pop that up as well. So if you do have anything prepped to your side on the side. So how about we jump straight into a question from Zoltan? It's a pretty prime key question at the very heart of any new product. So what is the driving force behind Shotguns and Sorcery as far as you're concerned?
The driving force. Well, it's because we love this kind of stuff, right? To me, two of the biggest authors that ever influenced me in my life were J.R.R. Tolkien and Raymond Chandler, right? So I always liked Tolkien. I like the high fantasy. I like the elves, the dwarves, all that kind of stuff. And the mythology and the second world fantasy that you're living in, how it just kind of breathes and feels like a secondary history that's real but not real, right? But on the other hand, I really enjoyed the street sensibility of Raymond Chandler stuff, right? The hard-boiled detective protagonist who has to walk down these mean streets without becoming mean himself, right? Which is really an important part of all that noir stuff. And to be able to combine those two, that's where for me, that's the sweet spot, right? I just like if there's a Venn diagram of those two things, I'm sitting right in the middle of it where they hit. And I hadn't seen a whole lot of that kind of stuff out there, right? There's some stuff out there that's a little bit darker fantasy that kind of fits it, but didn't have the that kind of that sensibility about it that I really craved. So that's one of the reasons I came up with it. Originally, this was going to be I had pitched it as a 3rd edition setting for the Wizards of the Coast World Hunt that they did way back in 2000 when they found Eberron, right? Which worked out okay for me because I ended up writing a trilogy of Eberron novels because the guy who won it was Keith Baker, a guy I had actually mentored into doing freelance game design. So, and more power to Keith. He is fantastic, does all sorts of great stuff, all sorts of really neat games over the years. But I come up with this idea that I pitched. It was one of 10,000, so I'm not surprised that it didn't make it very far. But then turned around, I actually sold this to Mongoose Publishing in the UK. They're like, oh yeah, we'd love to publish that. And the only reason that we didn't have this 20 years ago is because my wife got pregnant with quadruplets around that time, and that kind of threw all the other plans out the window. Marty vaguely remembers this stuff from when he was a little guy. He was about 3 at the time. So
yeah.
So crazy days. But then, Robin Laws asked me for a short story for something for the new hero anthology he was doing. And I said, let me dust this thing off. This has kind of been itching in the back of my brain for a decade now. I need to get at it. And I liked it so much that I wrote another short story for something else. And I did this thing in 2012 where I tried to write a bunch of novels in a year called 12 for 12, where I literally tried to write 12 novels in a year, right? I broke them down.
I heard you did it.
Not quite, actually. I broke it down into 4 trilogies, ran a Kickstarter for each trilogy, and then they all ran them all on Kickstarter, managed to fund every one of them. And then I managed to write not quite all 10 novels or all 12 novels in a year. I wrote 10 of those novels. I wrote a novel for Leverage, which is a TV show done by Chris Downey and John Rogers, who I had actually helped set up the deal. I know John Rogers, and I said, "Not John, you should be doing novels." And he's, "Well, do you know any editors?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know editors." So I set him up with a bunch of editors. Like 2 years later, they knock on my door and say, "Would you like to write a Leverage novel?" I'm like, "Oh God, I'm doing this right now." But I couldn't refuse because I love the show so much. So I wrote the Leverage novel, and I wrote 9 issues of the Magic the Gathering comic book for IDW, and a novella for StarCraft 2 that Blizzard published on their website. So I failed, but I failed well, right? I
failures go.
It's okay. I always say, if you're going to do something, shoot high, find something that seems impossible. And if you fall just shy of it, you're still going to be doing a hell of a job. It's still impressive to be able to pull that off. So, and I did manage to deliver the other novels not too long after that. So everybody who backed them got their books now. In fact, that last trilogy, which took me a little bit longer because we had some family issues going on with health with my parents and such like that, that's now going to become, it's called Monster Academy. And the guys over at Calliope Games are working with Lone Shark Games, Mike Selinger and his crew, and myself. And we're going to be publishing an adventure card game for that coming out sometime early next year, we hope. So,
Nice.
so a lot of, it was a very fruitful period of time for me, and a lot of great ideas came out of it. And now, we're seeing some more fruit of that. But what happened is we ran the Kickstarter in 2015. I licensed it to somebody else to do a role-playing game, Outland Entertainment. And in 2015, they ran a Kickstarter for a Cypher system role-playing game, a full-on role-playing game. And we didn't have access to 5e in those days because it wasn't part of the open gaming license at that moment. They released it a couple years later. And that would have been my first choice, just because it was the third edition idea to begin with, and I'm a big fan of D&D. But I really like the Cypher system. Monty Cook Games and those guys are old friends of mine, and they did a great job with it. And Rob Schwalb did the rules conversion for that. He was amazing.
Love Rob.
Rob's a great guy. You just had him on recently, I think, didn't you, for something?
No, we've not had him on.
You should. He's amazing.
We will hopefully soon. I've spoken to Rob, but he's, shall we say, a bit busy just now.
He is. He's got a lot of things going on in his life.
Oh, yeah.
Personally and professionally. So, yeah. But when you get a chance, Rob, if you see this, go join these guys. They're fun.
Absolutely. Rob's great.
So what happened, though, is that the publisher of that, they ended up having troubles. They had personal issues in their lives. One of the things about doing Kickstarters is now you see all this shit. It used to be you just saw the book when it showed up on a shelf someplace. You bought it. And now you can say, I want to give you money. And then that's great, except, all the delays that always happen for these things every goddamn time, you never knew about. But now you get to see them up close and personal and get monthly updates about them. So they didn't finally deliver that book for 5 years. It came out in 2020. And when it finally came out, the license had expired. And I'm like, well, I sat down with Jeremy Mullers, the artist who did all this fantastic artwork, and the publisher of the company, and said, are you really interested in continuing on with this? Because you've got a lot of other projects going on right now. And I understand now that you've had this first book come out, you still got to do all the stretch goals. If you just want to walk away, right?
Yeah.
I will own it. I'll help you. It's my property now. You did all this stuff. One of the bits of the contract was all the artwork and everything else. Everything developed for the game becomes my property because I was the original owner. And I said, because of that, I'm willing to work with you. Marty and I will handle the writing. We'll make sure this all gets done. You're going to continue to do the artwork, and we'll get the products out the door and make sure the Kickstarter backers get what they paid for, right? Because, again, I'm not legally obligated to do that, but these are my fans who are working with my property that I love so much. I wanted to make sure that they feel like they got exactly what they wanted and not felt like they got ripped off at any point. So we did that. And, in fact, on Monday of this week, we delivered the last thing for that Kickstarter, which was an art book, and went out to all the backers. It was a PDF. I hit the big button and it went and went in everybody's hands. And then on Tuesday, we launched the Kickstarter, which we'd been planning already anyway, right? The only question was, could we make? I didn't want to launch the next Kickstarter without fully fulfilling the last one, right?
Yeah.
I felt it was just a moral obligation to pull that off. And actually, Marty graduated from college last year in 2019 in the pandemic from UW-Madison, and he wanted to do.
That sounds tough.
Marty, what do you want to do at that point? You look like
didn't want to sit around.
Oh, we know
good
that
idea.
Yeah,
trapped during the pandemic as you were. So
yeah, well, I wanted to help you out. I read. I'm in the unique position of having been one of the people who read these books in 2012.
Exactly.
And having been fairly close to them, I read too much of your writing. It probably hurt me.
Well, it's an inevitability. My daughters know the same thing. On that, well, how about we move over to a question from Kilishandra. For you, what makes shotguns and sorcery different from other campaign settings? So what makes it stand out as a selling point for choosing your setting over someone else's?
Well, I think the big thing is it's the pressure of the zombie apocalypse that kind of focuses things. The fact that compared to a lot of traditional fantasy role-playing stuff, it's a little bit more advanced technologically, right? People have weapons from 1910, 1920, so they're wandering around with pistols, shotguns, the occasional machine gun, or Tommy gun, that kind of a thing. So, and just the sensibilities behind it are a little bit different. It's a lot less hail and well met, good fellow, and more like, and then the dame walked in with this assignment for me kind of a thing, right? So very, the jackbooted elves knocked down the door of my favorite bar and started the raid. That kind of a sensibility, as opposed to now we're going to meet and have breakfast and we're going to eat for 10 chapters. So it's a little bit different than that. It stands out in a lot of ways, but to me, it's that and the fact that the sense of fun for it is something we never abandoned. It's always been for me about how you get entertain people and how you make them excited and how you get them involved. And one of the other neat things about it is because I actually engineered this on purpose. There's very little outside of Dragon City other than zombies, right? And Marty has actually done a good job of fleshing out some of the more the closer outlying areas. But the neat thing about that is you can drop it into your existing campaign, right? You just need to find a blank spot on your map, right? If it said here there be dragons, you say here there be zombies and one dragon, and you pop it right there, right? Or it's just across an island or a channel or whatever. That's where this stuff is happening. And because of that, you can actually integrate it into whatever else you've already got going on. So if you got a campaign you've been running for 10 years or 6 months or whatever the hell you are, and you want to start doing something a little bit different with it, people can suddenly discover this, right? There are occasionally dirigibles that run back and forth from Dragon City, from the peaks there to other lands, just doing emissary type stuff. And you could be one of those people who comes in and figures it out. Or maybe you've been shanghaied by somebody and you've been dropped into Dragon City for a darker angle on it, right? And that way it's something that's easily integratable into your current game, but still a lot of fun on its own.
Anything that you feel, Marty, that differentiates Shotguns and Sorceries from the other settings you've seen out there?
Well, yeah, it's the urban fantasy thing. I mean, there's a lot of 5e stuff out there these days, but there's not a lot of like urban fantasy stuff, especially urban fantasy, like noir throwback stuff. Like urban fantasy is doing pretty well as a genre these days, especially in like novels. Like I think they just released like the 99th Dresden Files book. But like throwback neo-noir, like it's got orcs and goblins, and it really is like that Raymond Chandler flavor is what makes it different,
Nice.
while still being under the 5e mechanical sort of framework. Yeah.
Right.
I have a question from some loser. I say that because it's from him.
There we go.
I shall now back off and let him do his thing.
Yeah, so I was particularly curious about the species thing. I'm one of these sort of boring players who can repeatedly just play humans over and over again. Not because I don't like kind of other fantasy races, but A, because there's a challenge there, and B, I don't know, I always just keep defaulting back to the sort of generic human. But I'm always really interested in different fantasy species, and particularly the fact that you've introduced these two ones, like particularly mermen are quite a different species from normal. And I guess it was just a question of like A, why those two species, and then also have you got any other species in the back of your mind that you think would fit inside Dragon City?
I know the answer to this, but Marty actually did the work, so I want you to answer, Tucker.
Okay. Well, I'll answer, and then you can chime in at the end if you want. The thing with the two species we added in this book is that they were left in the they were in the Cipher System book as afterthoughts. They weren't playable races. They were humanoids who lived outside of the Dragon City walls as sort of hostile creatures in the monster section of that book. This is part of me, being one of the kids who read this book, read the original novels, and then growing up and going through these 300 pages of the Cipher System thing with a fine-tooth comb. Being one of the 10 people who went through that, like, detail by fine detail, and being like, I get to that, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. It came to me. I got to the mermen and the beastmen in the original book, the creatures in that book. And I'm like, there shouldn't be humanoids who live outside the wall that are mean all the time and suck. Part of the sort of conceit of the Dragon City setting is that all of the classic fantasy races are together in one place, and they're all just basically people who are trying to figure out how to get along inside of this city. So the idea that there would be humanoids who are living nearby the city, but they're like these savage, horrible people. Didn't sit right with me, so I took them and I flipped them around. I basically I rewrote them entirely for this edition. And there were a few others that I considered doing too, because we have like some of the adventure stuff that we have like these mole men that are mentioned briefly as living underneath the mountain, and we have other humanoids that are like mentioned briefly in the little bits of this. This is this has been going on like 10 years now in little fiction snippets almost. So there's a lot to draw from. But the way that I've revamped the race system, you can basically just play it however you want. Racial traits aren't, hard. You have to do, you have to enter and you have to up your charisma by 2 points if you're playing an elf. You have to down your intelligence by 2 points if you're playing an orc. If you want to play a mole man, you just write in mole man and then figure it out. I went explicitly extra detailed on mermen and beastmen because they were already laid out heavily in the original Cypher system game.
Right.
So
yeah, and honestly, in this game, it's those stats are less of an indication of nature than they are of nurture, right? So the people who are raised down in Goblin Town, they have no educational system. They're abused, that kind of stuff, right? The elves, on the other hand, are raised in incredibly opulent wealth. So they're going to end up with higher charisma scores for that kind of thing, right? On the other hand, an elf down in Goblin Town is probably going to get eaten alive. Not literally. We have, but it's when you're trying to recreate these things by stats like that, you always have to remember the context behind them, of course, right? And why they function that way. I know in other settings, we're trying to make that explicit, because in other settings it's been like, oh, the orcs are just naturally dumb. I'm like, no, they're not naturally dumb. It's just that they've been shit on for 500 years and living in the slums. This is the kind of things, if you're trying to measure intelligence the same way that we do with SAT scores in our country, you're going to fail because they're engineered at the people who are wealthy and trained to do that kind of stuff, as opposed to the people in the streets.
Like IQ test.
Yeah, exactly. IQ test is bullshit, right? They're really good at testing the people they're designed to test, and for people that are not designed to test, you all look stupid because they're not designed to test you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So given that we've talked a little bit about the 5e version, let's jump into a question from Kilashandra. What is your favorite bit of the 5e version that you wrote?
That Marty wrote? Marty wrote most of the 5e stuff.
Yeah.
That's you, buddy.
Well, that makes me right over to you then, Marty. So, Marty, what's your favorite bit of all the 5e stuff that you dropped in there?
I think the guns work pretty well, which is good because it is shotguns and sorcery. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons already has guns rules built into it. Like it basically just says in the I believe it's the Dungeon Master's Guide. If you're using guns, just treat them like hand crossbows or whatever. But that doesn't work if you get very far with more advanced guns. So I wrote in a bunch of extra mechanics for shotgun spread, and if you're using like an assault rifle or whatever. And I think those work pretty well.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased with those. We worked pretty hard on those, actually.
Can I ask you a question about that? I think it's one of the ones that I had pre-submitted, actually, specifically about gunplay, because one of the things that a lot of systems struggle with that is the scene that you always get in fiction, right, where somebody points a gun at you and you stop because if they pull the trigger, you're going to die. But in a lot of RPG systems, the mechanics don't support that. In Warhammer, say, if you're a reasonably developed character, somebody points a pistol at you, it's going to hurt. You're going to lose some wounds. If they roll a critical, it could be quite bad. But relatively speaking, you're probably okay. And it wouldn't stop you the way that in real life it would. And I know that D&D is a system that can suffer from that. So I don't know. Did you have a solution?
That? Is that the question?
It definitely is a system that can suffer from that. One of the things that we did was all bullets are armor piercing, because if you had a bullet, it would, if you were actually firing a bullet at like a D&D suit of metal sheet armor, it would go right through it. It would go right through, leather armor or whatever you were wearing. So all armor classes are very low. No, almost nobody wears armor, and most people are very low level. Like if you were a strong adventurer, you could get yourself up to like level 8 or something. But it's really it's as a setting, it's mostly intended for people who are between like levels 1 and 10.
Cool.
Because the way, it is a problem with like the way that like D&D and Pathfinder and some of these fantasy systems scale their leveling systems, where like you get up to level 20 and you're basically God.
Mm-hmm. So true.
But the guns deal a lot of damage and they pierce armor, which makes them extremely deadly at low levels. So
so that if somebody does point them at you, you will think twice.
Most of the time. I mean, obviously, if you're like 10th level, on that hand, you're like one of the most powerful people in the city, right? Yeah. And maybe you'll think twice about it, but you'll probably expect to be able to come up with some way to walk away, which is how the hit points are supposed to represent that kind of thing. Yeah. And of course, there's always, I always like to do an intimidate roll at that point, right? So if somebody comes up to you and points a gun at you, there are other reasons. Fear can put you in place rather than rational thought. So.
Yeah, because I remember it's funny you mentioned Mongoose, because also they did a lot of sort of D20 license stuff back for 3rd edition. I remember I think it was the Babylon 5 one that they did. I like changed the whole way hit points worked again to try and kind of reflect that, but it was quite a heavy change to the core system in order to make that kind of work. So
I think what Marty did was a little bit more elegant, that D&D players can be able to say, okay, I get it. It makes sense, as opposed to, I'm using a whole new system here, or I'm using, energy or whatever. It's a different kind of system. Does my constitution fail at this point? That kind of a thing. So it works pretty well, actually. We played it quite a bit, and it's a lot of fun versus zombies, because man, you just hit a zombie and it's like a zombie outline on the wall here where they used to be. It's good fun with the shotgun. So the sawed-offs are pretty deadly.
And I guess that's so inherent to the genre that of the stories that you're kind of telling there as well. So that's really good.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of funny because shotguns and sorcery, I mean, it's the zombies are a big part of it, but they're not in the title, right? So it's something that happens, but not too often. And when it does happen, you're like, oh shit, we have screwed up, right? There are zombies here, and there's bad news, which is of course one of the reasons we put them in our introductory adventure, just to fuck with people. So.
Can't go wrong with that. Okay, let's go over to a question from Seagoat. Apart from your love of D&D, because who doesn't love D&D? Why do SMS for D&D rule set? Alternatively, why publish it for Cypher when you did, and not hold out for a future D&D option? So
right.
I think a broader question earlier.
There. But I mean, the reason was because it wasn't an option. And the trick of doing something like that is, looking back, you're like, well, just 2 years later, you could have done it. Like, well, yeah, but at the time, we didn't know if they were ever going to release it, right? The history had showed us that they could have, but I was there when the 3rd edition discussion was going on with the open gaming license, and there was a lot of resistance to it, right? If it hadn't been for Ryan Dancy, who was the biggest proponent of the OGL, basically the guy who created it inside of Wizards, it probably wouldn't have happened, because most people in Hasbro are like, why would we give away our game for other people to do stuff with? It doesn't make any sense. And Ryan's like, because it makes more people want to play the game. And plus, you don't want to be publishing all that little stuff. You want to publish the big stuff. Let other people handle the little stuff. They'll do it for free. It doesn't cost us anything, and they're bringing in more customers. It's this whole idea of network externalities, right? The idea that one guy with a fax machine is worthless, but a million people with fax machines, suddenly you got something, or phones or whatever. It makes it worthwhile. The one device itself is not worthwhile. Having everybody have a copy of the DMG or the Player's Handbook, that's worthwhile. One of them doesn't really do as much good. So, when they were saying, let's do 5th edition, great. But we didn't know if and when we were ever going to be able to touch that. And we could have done a 3rd edition version, but, going backwards like that, after there have been already 2 versions of D&D released, didn't seem like a smart idea. And honestly, the Cypher system is a great system. I mean, Monty Cook was one of the developers of 3rd edition, and he had Bruce Cordell and Sean Reynolds and Shauna Germain and all these other people working on it with him. And they're fantastic designers, I know, from decades back. And I trust them. Plus, we got Rob Schwalb in to do it. He'd already done a shitload of cipher system stuff even as well. Right. The reason we got Rob in because he knew the cipher system backwards and forwards, and he was eager to bend it into a whole new shape. And then when it became open, we're like, oh, great. At some point, we'll do a 5e source book. And, basically Marty getting out of college, the license expiring, the first game being done, all delivered. The timing is right for us. So that's why we want to do it now.
Cool.
Anything to add to that, Marty?
No, I mean those were the reasons.
Yeah, that'll do it.
That's right.
Okay, so let's go over to one from Zoltan. Considering the number of 5e Kickstarters, what is the challenge to get visibility and not be lost in the mass of other Kickstarters? Yeah, that's a good one.
Damn fine question, sir. And if you have an answer, I'd love to hear it. So, well, I mean, right now we're looking for 10 grand and we're up to 23. I'm looking at right now. So that's not bad. I mean, there's some games out there like Avatar, which cracked several $1 million, right, or whatever. And some of my friends at Monty Cook Games and at Atlas are doing stuff that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars right now, and more power to them. But those guys are established companies who have been doing this stuff for a long time, and they've run multiple Kickstarters for this kind of thing. I have not done this for a while, so I'm not expecting $1 million out of this, right? I'm expecting enough to cover a print run, get some books into people's hands, and be excited about it. I am not trying to run a company off this. I'm trying to get something out there that I have a lot of passion over, and that we have, and Marty's excited about too. And we want to basically put it together and have people enjoy it. So honestly, to me at this point, it's already a success. If it brings in shitloads of money too, even better. But that's not all the big deal. I just posted on Facebook about this. I actually teamed up with Backer Kit Marketing. Backer Kit is doing our fulfillment for this.
Yeah.
Well, not pledge management, and then Atlas Games is going to do fulfillment for us because Atlas Games knows this stuff backwards and forwards. They do a really good job of it. So we partnered with Backer Kit for pledge managers because we're going to collect shipping, because shipping is a real
nightmare.
Yeah, that's the right word. I was trying to just
it's a nightmare.
It's terrible, right? It changes rapidly. There's seasonal surcharges that get tossed in. Trying to ship something to other countries, trying to figure out what the VAT is now. The EU has gone nuts on this stuff in various parts of it.
Oh, we know.
It's just crazy, right? Trying to get stuff. So I'm like, no, we can't figure that out. And my other answer would be, then we can't ship it to you. If I have to figure all that stuff out, you're not getting a copy because I can't ship it to you. But with Atlas, they have figured this stuff out. So they will do it for us. They'll ship it to you. You'll have to pay for it. So if it costs $50 to send you a $50 book, you're more than welcome to cough up for that. I wouldn't do it because I think that's highway robbery on the part of the post office, right? But if you got the money and you're that desperate for it, great. Otherwise, buy the PDF, man. We'll send, those electrons are cheap. We'll send them to you right away. So that's getting back to us, like, what's the challenge for this? I had gotten Backer Kit to do this, and we signed up for the marketing program. And you're trying to get what you set a number for what they call return on ad spend, ROAS. And the general number you try to get is 3. So like for every dollar you spend, you get 3 back. Put in $1,000, you get $3,000. And for this one, we've not gotten that. We put it in and it just didn't catch fire. There's a boatload of Facebook ads out there. But the return on it was low enough. We said, you know what, forget the ads. We're not doing them anymore. Because they can actually track how much they get off the ads as opposed to what comes from me being on Twitter or whatever else, or doing this, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we didn't bring in enough. I'm like, you're right. Let's call it quits. It was an experiment, right? And mostly because I don't know enough about Facebook and Twitter marketing to actually track all that stuff. It was good to actually team up with somebody who could. And, while I would say it was a failed experiment in that sense, I learned something from it, which is a good thing. I learned that if I do it again, I'll do something else, maybe some other kind of trick, partner with somebody else. But also, I think what it tells me is that for this kind of a product that doesn't have a massive fan base, doesn't have a license attached to it, but has somebody who's pretty well known, who's been pushing this stuff and has a lot of Twitter followers out there or whatever, this might be as good as you can get. And you maybe don't, when marketing is not going to help it. Right. Putting out ads for it is not going to help. And I'm probably reaching most of the people who are interested in it, which is both good and bad, right? I would love to have it catch fire and be $1 billion seller, but I'm perfectly happy with the level of success we're going to achieve, as it seems at this moment anyway. I mean, we've already 230% funded. And I'm thinking we'll crack 50K, maybe more with this thing, and I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah, 50K is a good number.
Yeah, well, I mean, and
you know,
people are like, "What do you do with the extra money?" It's like, well, I'm going on vacation. I'm sending my kids to college. I'm putting a roof on the house. You know, it's like, I'm not doing this stuff for free. This is not a charity, guys. And I do this for a living, right? This is my full-time job is entertaining people with words and games. So if I'm not doing this, I'm writing video games or novels or whatever else. And I don't think there's any shame in taking profit off what you do. In fact, I think that's the whole reason you do it. And if you don't take profit off what you do, then you will not come back and do it. If you lose money every time, you're just hurting yourself, and you're hurting your fans who will never see that stuff again. You need to make money.
Agree more.
You know?
Yeah, can't agree more with that one. There's almost a level of expectation that when success comes, you're supposed to immediately plow that success back into providing extra stuff, rather than just sitting down and going, now I'm actually at a position where I'm beginning to make some money and being able to survive in the industry that I love. And I really want to stay here. And the only way that you can stay is to ensure that you make some money along the way.
Right.
And yeah, exactly. And I think that there's more than enough space in products where, for example, you're making 50K on a Kickstarter. That's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money if you're providing all of the extras on top of it. And I think that leads very neatly into another question that we've got. So let's pull that one up from, where was it? There it is. From Kilishandra. What does the Kickstarter offer for Shotguns and Sorcery? And what were the reasons behind those options? And I think that possibly linked in to a degree, because one mistake a lot of Kickstarters do is making 1,000 options on top.
Now, we have 4 options, 3 of which are, one of which is a retailer option, which I actually hesitated about and didn't add until the last day, right? Just before we launched. But the 3 options are get a PDF, get a hardcover book, get a deluxe hardcover book. That's it, right? And the deluxe hardcover book is the same goddamn book, but with a really sweet cover on it, right? It's got black leatherette, foil stamp. We're hoping to add gilt edges and ribbons and all that kind of stuff. But those are the kind of stretch goals I want to have, or things that add to the functionality and the beauty of the book, but don't cost us a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
That we're not going to have to give away the farm for. And if we have to sit down and start writing extra books to go with this, for instance, that eats way into the profit margin and also delays the book, right? One of the nice things about the book right now is that we've got 95% of the text done and 95% of the art in already. So the chances of us blowing this and having this not show up for 5 years, I mean, shit, you know, a bomb could go off in the city and whatever. We could have another pandemic that we are not allowed to look at screens anymore, or whatever. It's going to screw us. But, you know, let's hope those things don't happen. All sorts of wacky shit happens. Exactly. Whoa, wouldn't that be bad?
LCDs.
But, you know, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver this stuff on time. I mean, the delivery date for this stuff is August of next year, right? And honestly, we should be able to hit that hopefully early. With any luck at all, we'll have the PDF out to backers around the end of the year. So you know, we should be able to get it in their hands. And then it's a matter of printing, which is a stone big problem these days. So it's
it really is.
It's not just printing. You have to find paper, which is now more expensive, right? And harder to get. Ships are sitting outside an LA harbor for weeks at a time, sometimes longer. The cost of shipping from China has quadrupled at least, right? And that's where most people are getting things done. Now, fortunately, I actually found a printer in Tennessee who's giving me a really good price, and we can have the stuff shipped up to Duluth where Atlas is, so we don't have to deal with a lot of that stuff. And
nice.
The funny part is the printer is Jostens, right? The people who print yearbooks in this country, high school yearbooks and college yearbooks and stuff like that. That means they got decades of experience printing high quality, full color hardcover books, and apparently they know what they're doing because they can do it fairly well and fairly cheaply. And that's one of the reasons we're offering just those tiers. We're not offering add-on dice. You can buy your own dice someplace else. If it doesn't say have an S and an S on it, fine, right? That means I can ship the stuff out.
How could you play without that, though?
This means I can ship the stuff out to you by media mail, which is cheap. It'll cost like $5 to ship it out, as opposed to $10 or $20 to ship it out. And we're trying to save everybody money on that sense too. So we don't want to add anything else in the books that would make it more expensive to ship out to people. But there are dice bags, T-shirts, all that kind of stuff. I could set up little extra stores on the side to do this stuff. If you want to buy them, go ahead. Very easily done. But I don't want this to be something where I have to pack all this shit into a box, ship it out to people, and then the other trouble is the last thing that shows up is when we get to ship. So unless you're really good at coordinating everything else sits in a warehouse for a couple months while you're waiting for that last thing to show up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's the truth. And we had a similar issue when we were doing the Warhammer starter set, because there was one component part of that took, let's say, a little bit longer than the rest of it. And it was just all sitting there waiting the factory to be boxed up. And that's not ideal.
Exactly. Yeah. It's tough. And when I was running Pinnacle, we did a game called the Great Rare Wars, which had miniatures and counters and all sorts of other shit in it and dice. And we actually hand assembled everything ourselves in a basement, right? We're just walking around the table, grabbing every piece of wood. Oh, I never want to do that again. So
no. I mean, just handling shipment and fulfillment's hard enough if you've got, say, a few hundred to a few thousand copies to send out. That's soul draining, but that's also assembling them.
Oh God. We were crazy though. Like we figured out we could just put stickers on this one, but other stuff we actually ran up to Iron Crown Enterprise, which was a couple of hours north of us, and borrowed their shrink wrap machine in the middle of the night and on weekends and did all this shit, right? And just whatever we could. We were young and foolish and didn't know any better, right?
We were all that once. Okay, let's pull up one from Creative Fossey. How simple or complex is Shotguns and Sorcery compared to other games? And if, for example, it is basically just D&D, what have you added on, and what extra complexity or perhaps simplicity has that added to the core concepts of what you're offering?
Marty, you want to tackle that one? You know this better than I do.
I hope you read it. So
no, I mean I've read it. You're the one who did it. I want to give you a shot at answering your question. Come on.
I don't think it's much more complex than base D&D. We did, or at least I did as much as possible to keep to bring the Dragon City setting into the 5th edition mechanical framework. Like new mechanics, there are a lot of new mechanics in this book. There are a fair number of new mechanics and new items with new mechanics and NPCs and monsters and whatnot.
Character class, right?
Yeah. But it shouldn't be harder to understand than Dungeons and Dragons. At a maximum, it should be Dungeons and Dragons +1.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you picked up any other D&D supplement in your life and used that, you're probably okay with this. You should be able to do it. But
yeah.
It's not like we didn't dumb it down. It's it is D&D. I mean, it's 5th edition. We're using their rules. So
would you say that the final result is basically D&D with some extra bits, or the extra mechanics you've added, are they new mechanics, or are they just reiterations of existing mechanics?
No, there's some new mechanics in there, right? Actually, some quite new stuff. The gunplay stuff that Marty came up with, there's a new character class, there's new playable races. It's hard to tell because there's so much out there by the OGL. Somebody else may have come up with something similar at some point, but it wasn't like we scoured Drive-Thru RPG and found everything that was similar.
Yeah, totally.
But there's this thing called parallel development. So I'm sure that somebody has come up with, somebody has got to have done Mer people before, for instance, right? I mean, there's a couple of years ago, they did, Wizards came out with underwater adventures. So I'm sure other people have done that kind of stuff before. This is our take on it.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, so let's go grab one from Zoltan. To a degree, we've tackled this one, so perhaps we talk around it a little bit.
Yeah.
Here, which came first, the novels, I presume, the books, or the RPGs? What was the core motivation at the beginning? Was it just the setting? Was it the setting turning into an RPG? Was it the setting turning into something that you can develop and turn into a whole multimedia empire? Or was it something else?
We're all multimedia emperors here. Come on.
Quite.
So, honestly, that was pretty much it. For me, it was the setting came first. And I'm like, well, I could turn this into something for D&D because I love D&D, but I'd like to play it this way. Right. And then I didn't end up doing that. So it ended up being the novels came first, the stories. First, it was 2 short stories, then the novels, then another novella. We actually have a comic book now that we are using as a stretch goal for the next rank for this Kickstarter. Again, we're not having to put anything into that. We delivered that to the backers of the previous Kickstarter, so we have it. It's not out there for the public yet. We're not going to let anybody else have it for another few months. So this is a prize, but it's like, here's some extra stuff. Doesn't cost us anything. Hopefully you enjoy it on top of things, right? The stretch goal for that's more for fun as opposed to let's make something new, because the new thing is what we're going to give you. The other stuff is just chrome. It's edges there. Let's
all right. Next one is, although I can't find the question, I do know it's here. It's from Zoltan, and it's: do you have any campaigns planned or any extra adventures planned for later, assuming it's a success. It's doing quite well for itself. Have you got any extras that you've got planned to go on top? Let me just find that question while
We
you're
don't have any
answering.
plans at the moment, but I mean, part of it is we're going to get this done and then look up and we'll say, all right, how'd that go? And if there's demand for more stuff, we'll do another Kickstarter and do more stuff is what we'll do. And that'll really depend on things like Marty. Would you like to write some more stuff?
Well, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. We're already we have little bits of content planned as stretch goals, but it's tiny things that are going to go in the base book. I got a post-it note here.
That's how many things we have planned, right?
with stuff I got to do. There's an adventure in the book already.
Yeah.
That's pretty long. So.
There was a 40-page adventure that we did for the Cipher System version that Marty wrote for the Cipher System version and is now converting over to the D&D version. Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that a starter adventure or is that one for more established parties?
It is. It's a starter adventure. So
yeah, it's a 2-part starter adventure. Yeah.
Nice, and I trust that sort of introduces you to the primary core concepts of what the setting offers.
Exactly.
And that's straight inside the rulebook as well. So
it is.
That's perfect. So in terms of extra content, if you did plan an extra adventure or campaign on top of that, do you think you bridge off of the starter adventure, or would you just go and produce new and single standalone episodes, or would you rather build something that was a bit more episodic?
That's a good question. I think that we could do both. I mean, one of the nice I try to do things that can actually work both ways, right? So if you do something that starts out, I think it would probably link into that at some point, right? You want to have all these, you want to be like the guy with the conspiracy map on the wall, and he's got all these pinpoints that link together at various things. We do set the game before the novels happen. It's where the short stories in the comic book happen, right? But the novels actually have some pretty big changes to the status quo by the end of the trilogy. So we set everything before that. It might be that at some point we decide we want to do stuff for after that too, although that might be a little bit crazier. Or they want to do stuff like I've actually got ideas for stories from like 10 years ago and 500 years ago for these setting as well. And maybe we could get back to doing some pure fiction as well. That would be a lot of fun for me. So I'm just most of the problem here has been I'm the bottleneck, right? It's one of the reasons I'm really happy to have Marty in here. Honestly, if he had not been around, this project would not have happened because I would have sat down and said, all right, I got to get into 5e. I got to make all this happen. I got to write all it up. And here he is. He's got time, right? But I'm writing video games and novels, and I'm working on the Marvel tabletop role-playing game and amongst all this rest of this stuff. So the chances of me being able to pull this off were pretty small. I can run a Kickstarter. I got the fiction I can do, but then Marty can come in and provide his expertise to the 5e, and I can kind of guide him through that, which has been great.
Yeah. Have you enjoyed it, Marty, as a process?
Yeah, it's good.
Not too painful, right?
Yeah. You're an all right writer.
It's the editor part here.
Yeah, editor. Yeah, you said it. Yeah, it's fine.
Yep. That's the reason I was editing your answer to that.
Yeah. It's very convenient, just coming in and doing the bulk of the work while you take all the credit.
That's exactly. I told Marty. We've got a long history of this, right? I hurt my ankle many years ago. I was going out to Comic-Con, and so I brought Marty along to carry everything for me. And I said, "You're my Sherpa, Marty." Yeah, in the traditional sense in which you're going to do all the work, and I'm going to take all the credits.
But I suppose that is an advantage, though, in terms of working together. Like, obviously, as family, you know each other really well. But also, Marty, with you having grown up, like kind of knowing the background and having read all the stuff before, that probably made the creative process quite seamless, I guess.
It did, although I did reread all the books before.
Yeah.
Has to be done.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to, given that we're coming close to the end of time, I'm going to come up with a far broader question, and that is for anyone who's watching, or more likely watching this later, because I can see this being one of those fun ones where you can share it around and say, this is a quick summary of everything that we're doing. Why should I, or indeed anyone who's watching, as a person with all the money in my pocket, throw that money at you for this particular setting? Why should I back this Kickstarter here and now?
Because we want both of your dollars, right? The reason I think you want to back this one is one. I mean, this is a passion project. We've done a lot of work. I've got 35 years of experience doing role-playing games professionally. Marty's got quite a few just playing them, and then he's been working on Cypher System the last couple of years and then doing this. He's doing a great job. So got me guiding it. We got some great artwork from the guys at Outland, Jeremy Muller, etc. One of the other reasons is I'm not going to sell this in stores. I'm not planning to sell this in stores. I'm not going to go through distribution. I'm not going to do that. There's a lot of reasons behind it, but usually it's because distributors are set up to handle large companies that have a pipeline of product, right? And I'm not planning to do that. So what they'll do is they might take it, but then they'll ignore us after that. So I don't want to go through all that. So if you want a copy of this book as a nice printed copy, especially the deluxe version, this is likely the only way you're ever going to get it. We do have a retailer level, like I said. So there are some retailers who will back it and put it in their stores, and you might be able to find it that way. But unless you happen to live near one of those people, or they put it up on the internet, because I'm supposedly only selling to brick and mortar stores, but sometimes things leak out somehow. This is going to be the only way you're going to be able to get a really good, high quality copy of this book. We will put it up later as print on demand and PDF through Drive-Thru-RPG. So you'll be able to buy it forever in one form or another. But that'll be a print on demand copy and a PDF copy, as opposed to the luxury copy with the ribbons and the gilt edges and all that kind of stuff. Because it's not that I don't believe in game stores and all that kind of stuff. I believe in they're great places. I have lots of friends who own them and run them and do great stuff. But this project is not something that's going to blow open any game store, right? So I'm not trying to press it in there. This is something I want people to be able to grab directly from us. And know, again, a lot of people say, what's the best way for me to buy something that puts the most money in your pocket? I get people asking that all the time. Kickstarter is the best way to do it, right? When you sell something in a store as a producer, or a publisher himself, not even the people making it, get 40% of what goes of that price usually, right? So if it sells for $100, they get $40, right? Now, on the other hand, if you buy something for $100 from me through Kickstarter, we'll take the Kickstarter takes their cut, credit card takes their cut. That means they get about 90% of that. So if you want to make sure you're supporting creators directly, doing it through a Kickstarter is a great way to do it.
I think that is a beautiful summary, because there are many middlemen out there, and they're super useful, particularly from the perspective of distribution and ensuring that your product gets out there, much like you were discussing earlier with marketing. Marketing has its place, and it can significantly multiply the number of people that both have access to it and hopefully will then buy it. But ultimately, if you're looking at the easiest way to just get the money directly into the pockets of the people who are making the stuff, this. So do you have anything you'd add to that, Marty? Why do you think people should back Shotguns and Sorcery, your awesome rule set of brilliance that was entirely you and nothing to do with your dad?
That's right.
I think it's pretty good.
This is our marketing plan. It's called understatement.
Yeah. I think
you should put that on the cover. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's all right.
I think if you read it and then maybe you played it, you'd have a good time.
There you go. Right, that's all. Right? This is why Marty's my hype man, right?
I just popped that up there. I think it's pretty good. That's it. You're done. You need go no further. This game is now sold to everybody. All right, I think that's a lovely place for us to wind up, given that we have ended on, I think, the best marketing line that possibly exists.
Let's go.
You can't do any better than this. I indeed think it is pretty good. If you want to grab yourself a copy, as we mentioned already, you can pick that up from, let's pop up the good old Kickstarter link there. You can pop it over to Kickstarter and you can give money directly to the awesome people that created it, not his dad.
Person.
Exactly. To the awesome person who created it.
He's got college debt, kids. He needs to pay it off.
But more seriously, it looks super awesome, and I think it's something that we'll all enjoy getting into our pockets and giving money for. So go grab your copy now from Kickstarter. Ta very much for coming along, Marty.
Thank you very much for having us on.
That was a lot of fun, and we will hopefully see you again at some point.
That'd be wonderful. It's always a delight.
Now, me as my first ever ending of an episode, given that I've never done it, let me just pop over here, press a button, and see if I can actually make this end the way it's supposed to. Here we go.